Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. We're here today with special guest, Michelle Witte, who's here to share with us Final Exit Network. What does the right to die with dignity truly mean in today's world? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. Michelle Witte stepped into the role of executive director with a deep personal connection to the cause. In 2022, she cared for her mother through the painful final stages of Parkinson's disease, an experience that profoundly shaped her understanding of the need for compassionate end-of-life options. Her mom asked her day after day, "When will this end?" Her suffering ignited in Michelle a passion to help ensure that no one else must endure what they did. That passion led her to advocacy at the Minnesota State Legislature and ultimately to discovering Final Exit Network. Now, as executive director, Michelle brings both her personal experience and a distinguished career in nonprofit leadership, aging and healthcare, civic engagement, and resource development. So welcome to the show, Michelle Witte.
Thank you so much, Marianne. It's great to be here.
Well, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about the work that you're doing. I'd love to hear from you what exactly Final Exit Network is and what does it do?
Well, great question. Final Exit Network really is a nonprofit. Then we educate and support people who want choice in dying. That means we provide clear information about end of life options and compassionate support for people who might be suffering and don't want to prolong that suffering unnecessarily. We all die, as we know, but it's not a question of if, but when and how. So we provide a lot of different services to help people learn about and ask questions of options to choose a peaceful and dignified death. We have coordinators who answer questions for people. We have our Chosen Death Forum, which is a monthly online gathering for people to ask all the questions they have in a safe space about death. It's not something we're used to talking about, right? A lot of times. And so it's a great way to get together with other people. We also have the Good Death Society blog and Right to Die news to keep people aware of all the things going on in the choice in dying movement. We also do special support for advanced care directives. Of course, that is especially important for people to advocate for their end of life care, but especially for people living with dementia as an area of concern and interest. And lastly, the biggest part of what we do really is the education about very specific legal end of life options. People often just don't know. And as we'll explore, my story was one where I did not know all the legal options available to me. And knowledge is power as we age. So we really help people understand what's going on, what's out there, what's happening in medical aid in dying. That's in 12 states now. The concept called voluntary stopping of eating and drinking, Swiss clinic options. There's options for people to go out of the country, and also then our own exit guide program, which provides trained volunteers who serve as exit guides to provide information so that their end of life can be peaceful and have practical options that they can consider. So there's a lot going on in there, but that kind of gives you the overview of all the things we're working on.
Well, I found this to be just so interesting. Now, is this something you mentioned it's available in 12 states? So, can you share a little bit about that?
Right. So it is helpful to understand kind of the difference of the options. So medical aid in dying is really the legislative move that's been afoot here in the last decade or so within our country and around the world that makes it possible for, again, qualified, capable adults with a terminal illness who are expected to die within 6 months or less to get direct medical intervention, to get a medication in order to die peacefully. And that is now available in 12 states. There's 2 states that don't require that you live in those states, Vermont and Oregon, but generally you have to live in the state where you work then within your healthcare system to legally provide that kind of comfort. So that's the big thing to understand overall. The challenge with medical aid in dying is that it does not include people like, for example, my mother who had Parkinson's disease, and she would not have qualified because a lot of people aren't necessarily given a 6 month, sort of exit date, right? So they don't qualify. People with dementia, other things. So medical aid in dying is one great option that we support, and we're grateful that people are working on that. We also these other 3 options, though, that are the ones that people often don't hear a lot about, and that's where we really focus in on, is the voluntary stopping of eating and drinking, or called VSED, which is an increasingly documented way of hastening one's death when people are not living in MAID states. And then again, the Swiss clinic options, and then our exit guide program. So I'd love to talk more about any of those too, but I like to make that distinction that, again, it's great to have medical aid in dying in 12 states, but there are other options when people don't qualify for that support.
Well, can you share your story with us?
Yeah, so I was especially drawn to this job. It's really more of a vocation, of a mission for me, because I've been involved in long-term care and serving seniors for my whole professional life, and didn't realize all the options available to me. And my mother had Parkinson's disease, and I brought her home to hospice care here in my home in 2022. And her life was really unbearable. She didn't have necessarily a terminal illness, as most people with Parkinson's, for example, if you Google how do you die with Parkinson's disease, sadly, 70% of the people um, die of aspiration pneumonia, meaning they choke to death. There's a lot of diseases that just don't fit a nice little comfortable way of ending your life. And she was stuck in that. She had really, really debilitating conditions, and every day would ask me, when will this end? When will this end? I can't take this. And someone had brought up to me this notion of voluntary stopping of eating and drinking, or what we call VSED. And this is a very legal, these are everything I'm talking about today are legal options that people do have the right to refuse treatment, right? They have the right to refuse, I don't want any more chemotherapy, or I don't want any more of this medication or that. It's actually legal for anyone to take their life at any time, but it's not always legal to assist people, right? It's not. That's the challenge we'll discuss. But in this case, when people say, I just can't go on anymore, I want to stop eating and drinking, it is a legal method, although it is not always supported. A lot of times there's a lot of confusion around it, what can be allowed or not allowed. In my mom's case, we did have hospice, but they were clear that they couldn't really support, they could help her with the medications and to make her comfortable. But there was still a lot of gray area, and I was very much left on my own to follow through with that. And I just kept telling her, this is your choice, Mom. And it took her, she was only like 108 pounds at the time she started, but she eventually, went 11 days with no food, 5 days with no drinking before she passed. And it really brought to life for me this, and there's so many hundreds, thousands of stories published out there and available of people who really are struggling at the end of life with very few options. I just kept saying to myself, why is this so? Why do we have to go through this? We know her life is at the end. This is a choice she has. Why can't we just give her a medication and help her pass peacefully? I sat with her through a whole day of what they call agonal breathing, which looks like they're trying to catch their breath. It was just not acceptable to me. And my mother-in-law also died a very, unfortunate death of pain and suffering with Parkinson's. So there's a lot of people who don't fit in to the medical aid and dying world. But also, I just think the whole healthcare profession has to ask themselves those questions. If you're here to do no harm, what about the harm done with people who are suffering at the end of life with no good options? So that is a popular way, for lack of a better word, that people are using to try to provide some relief.
Well, thank you for taking the time to share that with us. I've actually had a really dear friend that went through something similar. She was just at the final stages of her life, very much in pain, not really responsive, not eating, not drinking, and they wanted to put in a feeding tube. And her family said no. They didn't want to do that because she was at the end of her life. And it's interesting. I know the medical field is looking to help and prolong life, but sometimes we just need to be able to say goodbye.
Absolutely. It is a conundrum. Sometimes you try to understand, why do people have a problem with this? Of course, I often say there's lots of arguments about why people feel that people should not hasten their death, but there really are no good reasons. The medical world gives us many, many great choices to live our lives, joyfully. And it should and can also provide ways for us to end our life peacefully. And we need to keep pushing that conversation forward. We're very happy here at the Final Exit Network to be able to provide some comfort to people now, though, and that's one of the things was really drawn to with the organization, that so many people are just scared. A lot of people who have a bad diagnosis, or they're caring for a family member or looking ahead, and they're scared. And I'm just so, gratified that we have ways that people can come in and get their questions answered, know they have options, learn how to be a good advocate for themselves. Simply giving people that, all of that information really gives some, people power, right? I think that is, again, as I said, um, we really need to have that kind of power in our lives with education to know what our options are. And our program is really one of the only programs. There's so many great choice and dying organizations, and so grateful to them all. But we really provide help to people today. Again, if you need help now, you can't wait for MAID. You maybe VSED is something that you're frightened of or doesn't work for you. We also have our Exit Guide program, which provides trained volunteers who served as exit guides to provide information, so that people can have, again, that exit that's peaceful. We have a very rigorous application process and only provide education and compassionate presence. We do not, none of the organizations that are out there talking about choice and dying provide any physical assistance. We do not provide the means, but our services are to educate and help people really have their own self autonomy shine through. All of our services are free of charge, again, supported by members and donors. We do not provide any charge for any of the services we provide. And I think that's something that people really like. People like to know, wait, I have an option. And just knowing that can provide comfort, in addition to being able to offer that exit guide program for folks in need.
So I know we've talked a lot about choice in dying, and we may have even covered most of this. But when it comes to talking about what choice in dying means, can you share that with us? And isn't this a really controversial topic?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is controversial, and yet, like we said, we're all going to die, right? And so, and we're all given choices, all along the way. We have various diseases and things that come up in our lives. We're given choices every day. So why it's controversial, of course, there are just many things that go into it. And but I really what we're really talking about choices is helping people just like they do during their healthcare to make informed decisions. It's just how to make informed decisions in your final days. So whether that's using hospice, where most of us are familiar with hospice, or palliative care is another terminology that people often don't know, what does that mean? It's often pain relief and comfort. Or in some cases, it's self-directed dying. So in the case of my mother, we had hospice, we had palliative care, and none of those worked for her. We tried many, many things. She was still having, daily seizures, panic attacks, and I had like 78 bottles of medication in my house that hospice was happy to provide. And we tried all those things, but it just not everything is curable because we all are going to face our end. So, what I think is really important to understand is that, you know, all of these services, however, in choice and dying, are all only provided to competent adults. And sometimes people will talk about the real pushback often in this movement is coercion, the fear that people who are vulnerable or people with disabilities or or people who are have a truly just purely mental health condition will somehow be coerced or allowed to die, you know, not without their intent or without their consent. And I really want to point out it's really the opposite, right? When you don't have any systems in place, anyone could be coerced into anything today. What's really great about the medical aid in dying movement and all the other choice in dying options, such as we provide with Exit Guide program, is there are rigorous checks and balances. People have to produce medical records. They need to, be screened for mental health wellness. Families are involved. There are so many checks and balances to make sure that people are competent and are facing a severe medical problem, not simply a mental health problem, before they, plan their final exit. So I really want to try to help people better understand that this is actually our ability to better provide clear options for competent, adults making their own decision for themselves. I mean, again, it is really protects everyone, including those who maybe are fearful of people making decisions for them. Everything we're talking about in choice and dying is allowing everyone today, me, myself, my own person, to make choices for my own life. So I think that's something we have to keep really reiterating in the conversation.
So, what role do volunteers play in this whole program that you have?
Great question. We have so many dedicated volunteers, almost 80 people. And of course, in the nonprofit world, we rely on very smart, kind souls to help. And we really have our volunteers serve many purposes. We have a medical review committee, like we talked about. That again, anyone who applies to come into our Exit Guide program has to submit medical records and application process. So we're really privileged to have medical professionals to review those. We have trained people, our coordinators, who are trained to provide all of those great questions, answer those questions we're talking about, provide access to educational resources. And then our guides themselves who are trained to really provide emotional support, information, and a comfortable presence for people as they go through, you know, walking alongside with the families and walking alongside them as they go through these really profound moments so they don't feel isolated. I really felt that way, Marianne, when my mom was dying, an only child, and here I had hospice and we had a great care system, but I really was all alone. I didn't know, wait, how do I do this? I'm like looking through papers, I would have really valued somebody personally just being with me Even though my mother was very clear this was her choice and her choice alone, we were helping facilitate it. I'm really grateful that we can provide that compassionate presence for people as they consider and go through their final days.
What a big piece that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and does it take a special person to be a volunteer? Are you looking for certain characteristics?
The biggest one is obviously is compassion. Another set of volunteers I forgot to mention really are outreach and education volunteers, people who write our blog and do our chosen death forum and provide our speakers bureau. All of our people share our commitment to choice and dying, individual autonomy. We should all have a choice. I understand that not everyone wants that choice, right? It's certainly appropriate for people to say, hey, this isn't what I want, and that's fine. But the people who don't want that shouldn't make it impossible for others to make that choice. That's really what, the essence of autonomy is. I should have the ability to make legal choices myself. So, certainly, all of our volunteers really understand and are committed to that. Most of them have seen it. They've seen good deaths and bad deaths and know the difference and understand that there's power in helping people through these tough times. So, certainly, I think everyone has an understanding, probably an experience with it. And a compassion and a strong belief in it's our First Amendment right, to be able to educate people on all of the options out there to them to help people know and be empowered, not only with information, but with knowing there are people to stand beside you. So I think those are things we all share in common.
Well, congratulations on your new role as executive director there. I mean, what a big deal that is. And it just has me thinking, like, what impact do you hope that Final Exit Network will have under your leadership?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. Well, I really am excited to expand awareness, again, of people to know about their rights and their options. Again, this was just 3 years ago, and I didn't know. And I'm involved in long-term care. I help to advocate for medical aid in dying here in my home state of Minnesota. So I know we need to get more information. I also really want to build more bridges with healthcare providers and policy makers so that conversations about end of life choice become part of the broader dialogue about personal autonomy and healthcare. We need to broaden the conversation to accept that as we work to extend the quantity of our lives, helping people to live longer, we must also accept that quality of life is a factor, and people should be allowed to stop treatment when their lives are no longer bearable and to include choices that help them end their life in peace, preserving their dignity. I also really hope to help teach people the language they need to discuss this difficult topic. I know it's hard, but again, while there may be many arguments, some bring up religious, ethical, medical, or legal arguments, there are no true reasons to let people like my mother suffer needlessly for months, weeks, or days, knowing her life was coming to an end anyway. So I am really looking forward to also, understanding people's concerns, their pushback on choice and dying, and being able to better engage them. I really hope people will take a look at our webpage, and we have wonderful stories about people who, in their situations and the choices they made. And I think as we get to promote that more widely, we will see people growing with greater awareness and acceptance of this it really important step in our healthcare, right? Our healthcare should take us from birth through death. I often say I felt like I was, brought by this great, healthcare system and then left on a cliff with nowhere to go. And we need to move that cliff away and be able to all be in this together.
Michelle, earlier you mentioned the Swiss clinic options. Can you share that with us?
Yes, I can. So Switzerland is one of the only countries in the world that does provide Again, a peaceful exit option regardless of where you live and your circumstances. It does, however, have a process. You do have to apply. There's great rigor. There are, I believe, 3 clinics now, and we do have sort of volunteers who are experts in that for people who choose that. People will often fly to Switzerland, and that's how they'll choose to end their life. It's expensive. We don't take any money for it or any money for our guidance, but the clinics do need to cover their expenses. So we try to really help them understand those options. Medical aid in dying and the whole choice in dying movement is a worldwide conversation, right? We're part of the World Federation of Right to Die Societies, really talking with people across the globe about how they're managing this situation. Canada is really out front in medical aid in dying, as are the Netherlands and other countries. But unfortunately, there are still a lot of challenges, right, that are out there. Even though we've shown all of these, again, we only discuss legal options. And the Swiss Clinic option is one of them, but a lot of conversations happening across the globe, and we're really privileged here at Final Exit Network to be a part of that conversation and keeping that information out there for folks to learn about.
Now, is there a misconception that says that perhaps Final Exit Network is promoting like suicide? And if so, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's a big one, right? We People will often talk about choice in dying as assisted suicide, and it's just a really unfortunate choice of words, right? It's a real common misconception. What we support is very rational, considered choice at the end of life when someone's facing unbearable suffering or terminal illness. That's very different from impulsive suicide based on a mental health condition that does have effective treatments. We are very clear in the work we do, as is medical aid in dying, and the whole movement as a whole really is making that distinction. We have the suicide hotline at the top of our webpage. We're very clear to promote good mental health and suicide prevention for people who have other options. So, but it's very different than choice in dying and ending your life for a terminal illness or a completed life. Our focus is on compassion, autonomy, and helping people avoid needless suffering as they face difficult health conditions for which ongoing medical intervention cannot provide relief. So we really wish healthcare would provide all the options to us and help us live our lives as comfortably as possible. So we do not I think this is the ongoing challenge in the dialogue, to look at this as assisted suicide. But when you read the stories or you encounter people like my mother and my story, and you would say, is this suicide? She is clearly at the end of her life. She has tried all these things. She's in unbearable pain. That is very different than, somebody who has a health condition for whom there might be treatment to keep going. So we do make a very big distinction and keep pushing for others to see that distinction and allow people this important human right.
I think most people don't really realize the level of pain that people go through at the end of life and just how unbearable that can be.
It is so true. And I think I put the shout out there for people who kind of wonder, gosh, I don't know about this. Is unfortunate. It's a good fortune if you have not had to sit with someone like I did with my mother, and so many tens of thousands of people do, and watch them suffer. But please try to learn about that and understand that, if you were lucky enough to not be a part of that, uh, still understand that others are out there with that challenge. And again, it really, if it's something that you personally don't want for yourself, you don't need to choose it. There's nothing about medical aid in dying that forces people into hastening their death or ending their life any too soon. Nothing at all. Everything is for only competent, people who've made choices in advance or at the time, that people are really saying, I want this for me very clearly and distinctly. not about, I want this for other people. I want this for me. That's really it's a simple message overall, but it gets complex as people bring in a lot of different filters to the conversation.
So, Michelle, how can people get involved or learn more?
Right. So please come to our website at finalexitnetwork.org. You'll find so many resources about the services we offer, how to volunteer. Also, I really encourage people to watch our two short videos on our homepage. One explains the services and choice in dying really well. The other is a wonderful story of someone who did go through our exit guide program, a beautiful story. I think really understanding the stories, we also have an anthology that was done by a wonderful volunteer of stories that when you really start to realize and see the people and what their choices were and why they make these choices to hasten their death, you really start to understand. So I hope that people will do that and become a member. Very easy to become a member. We have a fabulous magazine we put out quarterly, and we have a lot of access to these conversations, like our Chosen Death Forum. So become a member, get involved, consider volunteering, and most of all, please do have those conversations with your families. Get your advanced care planning ducks in a row, as I say. Start to think about it. It is something I know isn't, hey, we're having supper tonight. Let's talk about how we're going to die. I do that though now, and people know that for me, but it's kind of been, it's freeing to say, listen, this is a normal process. If people are prepared, they've thought things through, we can live our lives with greater joy and fulfillment when we know we have a plan and we know we have options in place and our family knows. We don't leave our family behind wondering how am I going to deal with this? So lots of ways. Please know too that everything we do is really education support. We don't provide any physical assistance or the means to end their lives, but again, we do have all that other great education and compassionate presence, and all our services are free of charge. So hop online and feel free to reach out to me personally too with any questions you might have.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, thanks for helping me get the word out there. I appreciate it, Marianne, very much.
Well, thank you, Michelle. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about Final Exit Network. To learn more, visit finalexitnetwork.com, be part of their community, and make sure to sign up for their newsletter. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.